Hello, everyone. It's 9 a.m. now on this beautiful day in Washington, D.C. Welcome, everyone. My name is Srinivas Gurajada. I work in the PEFA Secretariat. To chair this webinar of PEFA, we have Jörg Wallenweder, Deputy Head, Swiss Cooperation, SICO. I hand over to Jörg to conduct the proceedings. Jörg.
Okay, thank you very much, Srini, for these introductory words, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone present in this webinar. I'm grateful to Srini and the World Bank to trust me with some introductory remarks. I promise to keep it short to leave ample room for the truly important people here, our experts on the panel. So as some of you probably know, ZHAW is among the 7 partners that established the PEFA program in 2001 and has supported the initiative ever since. The reason why ZHAW has been loyal to PEFA for more than 20 years is the relevance and quality of its products and approach. We see PEFA as a global public good and will continue to contribute to the maintenance and strengthening of the PEFA framework, as well as the knowledge sharing, as we do it here, and learning around the initiative. These are not just lofty words, I can assure you. The value we see in PEFA is underpinned by the fact that ZHAW uses PEFA as the key diagnostic for its operations in the domain of public financial management. Since the start, we were involved in more than 107 PEFA assessments, of which in more than 50 we were the leading agency. So our strong interest in PEFA is also our motivation to support the development of the framework, to keep it relevant in a very dynamic environment. In times of multiple crises, this is even more important, in my opinion. So possibly the greatest crisis of our time is climate change, and PFM has an important role to play in addressing this crisis. Given that governments decide every year on spending a very significant share of GDP, PFM reforms that incorporate the implementation of climate-sensitive financing policies can have a huge impact on our environment. The paper you are going to discuss shows that procurement, a crucial part of budget execution, can contribute to greener government investments. However, the paper also concluded that we need a holistic approach to make change happen. This is a very interesting result from my perspective, as it confirms my view that we have to include the expenditure and the revenue side into the equation, from taxes to budget execution and procurement. The work done under this excellent research competition is one step in that direction. The PEFA climate module, which we supported and is still in its pilot phase, is another. Many more are needed. It is in this spirit that I hope that today's discussion will contribute to the readiness and commitment of us all to walk this way. And in this regard, I wish all the participants many new insights from the discussion with the excellent experts on the panel. Thank you and keep up the good work. So with that, I gladly hand over to my colleague Nike from the World Bank, who will moderate the presentation and panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yuri. Really nice to see you again. Good morning from my end colleagues. My name is Nike Oyeyola. I'm a practice manager in the Governance Global Practice of the World Bank. Welcome to this very interesting webinar. I'm sure we're all ready to really benefit from this important discussion. Colleagues, you'll agree with me that there's been increased discussion on global public goods, and one of the very important parts of these is on climate and on clean environment. So this makes today's discussion very core and very important. On the part of the World Bank as an institution, in addition to our focus on poverty reduction, we've also been having increased conversation on how to bridge poverty reduction and climate change policies globally, at the country level, at the regional level. And just to further bring it down to the level of the governance global practice, which we represent and which is sponsoring this event, we've also given increased attention on how governance can play a critical and a relevant role in the discussion on climate change, particularly as it relates to issues around governance, around public financial management, around procurement, around, even public policies, things related to that. So that is why this very important research, which the World Bank, the Governance Global Practice, the PEFA Secretariat jointly did with the Institute of Public Management of the Zurich University, becomes very important. So today, the core objective we want to achieve is to discuss the key elements and characteristics of public financial management systems that could influence or impact the effectiveness and efficiency of green public procurement. And to do this, again, colleagues from the Zurich University, from the Institute of Public Management, developed a paper sponsored by the PEFA Secretariat on the interplay of climate change and public financial management. Of course, looking at it from the perspective of greening public procurement. So today, I'd like to introduce our panelists and our guests. First, I have two colleagues, two friends, let me say. I call them friends because Antonia was with us before. So you never forget where you left, Antonia. So we have two people from the university who will be discussing this paper. I have Antonia Idagra and Alma Ramsden, permit my pronunciation, who, like I said, are from the Institute of Public Management of the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, that would present the paper. But also as discussants, we have Reida Kashta, the General Director of Public Procurement Agency in Albania. We also have Barbara Zionowska, Senior Procurement Specialist from the World Bank, and Svetlana Klimenko, Advisor with the Operations Policy and Country Services of the World Bank. In addition, two of our colleagues from the PEFA Secretariat will also give their perspectives on the paper and the general discussion. And these are Tia Rapana and Richard Sutherland. So without wasting much time, I would like to pass these on to Antonia and Alma to present the paper briefly, and then we can have the conversation. So Antonia, Alma, over to you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and I will share my screen with you now so that you can all see the presentation. All right. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides. Thank you very much. Okay, then let me get started right away. First of all, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present our research here at this webinar. We feel very honored and look very much forward to the discussion with you. This paper investigates the role of public financial management in mainstreaming green considerations into the public procurement process, so that ultimately government spending can contribute to a reduction in CO2 emissions. Our focus, the focus of this research, is on identifying enablers within the PFM system to make public procurement greener. And our initial research suggested that there are three key features of the public procurement system which enable greening of public procurement. These being its form of organization, its mode of operation, and its financial conduct. And we have investigated these three key features in detail. By doing so, our study took a broad and a systemic approach, and this is also one of the main contributions of our paper, as such an approach had actually not been taken before. The starting point of our research was the question, can public procurement contribute to a reduction in CO2 emissions? And our extensive research to answer this question revealed that although there is a significant uptake of environmental considerations in public procurement by countries all over the world, and even though many countries have developed green public procurement considerations in their legislations, there seems to be still a gap between the conceptual and the actual implementation of green public procurement. Meaning there seems to be a gap in the policies around green public procurement and the actual actions which are performed at national or subnational levels of government. And this led to our second research question: is there an implementation gap between the regulatory framework and GPP practice? We investigated this gap in detail and analyzed which solutions the public financial management system has to offer to overcome this gap. And this led to our third and final research question: how can a PFM system contribute to closing the implementation gap and greening public procurement? How did we go about to answer these questions? We first conducted an extensive desk research, which included papers from peer-reviewed journals and publications from governmental and non-governmental organizations. Once we selected our 3 case study countries, we also reviewed publications and internal documents from these selected countries to really gain a deep understanding on how GPP in these countries is applied. And then we did interviews with key stakeholders from the 3 selected countries to explore our research questions, validate our hypothesis, identify good practices in GPP, and derive the policy recommendations. Our research was very much focused on finding countries whose PFM environments and also their green public procurement system offer promising solutions to overcome the implementation gap that I described earlier. So the focus of our research was on elements of the PFM system that facilitate GPP, meaning the focus is really on the PFM environment rather than other factors such as, for example, economic development. And we were ultimately interested in what can countries which are still at an early stage of GPP implementation, what can they learn from the successes, the failures, the challenges in countries which are already at a more advanced stage of GPP implementation. And this has led to these 3 case study countries you see on the slides: the Republic of Korea, the Republic of Austria, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. All 3 countries are seen as forerunners in green public procurement, and they serve as models of good practice for other countries. So coming to our findings, addressing our first research question, we do find evidence for a significant potential of GPP, so the greening of public procurement, to reduce CO2 emissions. This is a result, most notably resulting from the sheer volume of the public sector, its purchases, and also the predisposition of governments to lead the way in greening. So governments, they can display willingness to go green, for example, by taking risks in the form of a higher purchasing price for more eco-friendly products. They can also apply innovative technologies and provide subsidies or grants for greening measures throughout the supply chain. However, we also found that it's very hard to measure the effects of GPP on CO2 emissions. It's really hard to quantify. This is due to the differences in methodologies applied and also the disparities between economic sectors and the design of GPP policies. So some sectors are much easier to green than others, and this is a result, for example, of differences in the market power of the public sector. And even within the same sector, effects can be very different depending on the specific measures that are being taken. And also, lastly, a lack of reliable data can make it very hard to measure the exact impact. To answer our second research question, we find that yes, there is indeed a gap between GPP regulatory framework and the actual implementation of green public procurement. To answer this research question, we gathered evidence from 55 different countries, and we found that in more than half of these countries, a GPP implementation gap exists, meaning that the policies around green public procurement are in place and also specific targets are set, but the corresponding actions, be it at national or subnational level, they lag behind, and the targets that they have set themselves have not been met. And about a third of the countries, they have no policies in place and also have no specific targets. And as such, also, they don't have any concrete actions at either national or subnational level. And then only a minority of countries, to which our 3 case study countries also belong, and they have GPP policies in place. And they have very specific targets, and they comply relatively strict with their policies. We have identified several reasons for this implementation gap, and one of them is, for example, the complexity of the procurement system itself. It's also due to a lack of political will, and very importantly, it's also due to a higher purchasing price of more eco-friendly products, and something we'll talk about more later on. And thirdly, we find evidence that the PFM system can contribute to closing the implementation gap. And here I would like to hand over to Antonia Gruffel, who will elaborate more on this point.
Thank you, Alma. So we were looking into whether and how the PFM system or certain aspects thereof can contribute to closing the implementation gap. And for this purpose, we examined 3 features of the public procurement function. Its form of organization, this refers to centralized or decentralized public procurement systems. Its operational mode, so whether automation of the public procurement function plays a role, and its financial conduct, where we focused on the role of cost accounting methods such as life cycle costing. When it comes to the form of organization, there are 2 main structural archetypes of public procurement. Centralized procurement combines the procurement activities of several contracting authorities, oftentimes in a specialized agency. And decentralized procurement refers to a process whereby a procurement organization adopts its purchasing decisions individually. In practice, of course, there is no fully articulated centralized or decentralized public procurement function. Rather, the systems show a certain degree of centralization. We found evidence that highly decentralized public procurement is not suitable for targeting broader policy objectives such as greening. Some degree of centralization is necessary to mainstream environmental considerations into the public procurement function. Although there are many advantages, a full centralization, just for the sake of greening public procurement, does not seem sensible, and it's also not necessary. But we found that switching to a higher degree of centralization should be envisaged, and there are various ways of achieving that. The minimum option are so-called buyer groups. These are ad hoc arrangements of purchasing entities of a collaborative and non-formal nature, and this works also very well in decentralized environments. For example, these exist in the Netherlands. There are buyer groups that coordinate with regard to joint green purchasing criteria, and this then helps the bidders to identify common preferences of the public sector and adjust their supply accordingly. Another option are joint purchases of several entities. This is when similar products or services are purchased jointly. We found that this works best for homogeneous contracts. When central purchasing bodies are actually established, which is then the institutionalized joint procurement, this should be done ideally at the lowest possible level of government. In Austria, for example, there is one central purchasing body at the federal level, but this is complemented by regional central purchasing bodies that combine the procurement of municipalities. Excuse me. Not least, when state-of-the-art e-procurement systems are employed, how the procurement function is organized really becomes of secondary importance, because it allows to harvest the benefits of either organizational form. It allows the purchasers to be close to the market, while at the same time compensating for lack in professional procurement capacity. This brings me to our next point, the operational mode. Regarding the primary objective of public procurement, which is the delivery of goods and services in a timely, economical, and efficient manner, the automation of the public procurement function is highly beneficial. Be it the replacement or the redesign of a paper-based public procurement process as a whole, or the modernization of individual stages through the application of e-procurement solutions. Our study shows that e-procurement is also very relevant for GPP implementation, and that certain e-procurement elements and tools are especially helpful in terms of greening. First of all, in general, the supply side should always be considered. It is not easy to identify markets and also screen markets for suitable suppliers. And this is where, for example, AI solutions, artificial intelligence solutions come in, as they allow for large-scale online research and ultimately replaces time-consuming manual scanning. Second, the more administrative and static phases of the public procurement process, such as the tendering and also the award phase, they require less human interaction and can therefore easily be automated. In turn, this can then free resources to strengthen the more qualitative tasks, for example, to establish green technical specification and award criteria, or to monitor contract implementation. A web-based public procurement portal is considered one of the most important tools for generating competition, but these portals should be designed in such a way that local and remote SMEs, who often spearhead sustainable production, can also compete in public tendering. It should be intuitive and user-friendly, so that suppliers that might not be as have a basic internet literacy can handle the systems easily. And virtually in every case study country that we looked at, there was also offline support offered to potential suppliers, either in the form of hotlines or service centers. The goal of green public procurement is to buy green, which can only be evaluated if post-award data are available. So contract management and monitoring tools are especially useful in this regard. And this data then help in developing the supply side, but also provides policymakers with important information necessary to refine the guidelines and identify need for action. Now coming to the last feature that we examined, financial conduct, where we focused on the role of cost accounting methods such as life cycle costing. This refers to a methodology to evaluate all costs, my apologies, to evaluate all costs over the life cycle of works, products, or services, such as costs related to acquisition, to the use of the product, consumption of resources, and so forth. The cost of externalities, such as greenhouse gas emissions, it can be added provided that their monetary value can really be determined and also verified. Insofar, it can be seen as a better indicator for value for money than the purchasing price. But despite numerous advantages for organizations, the application of life cycle costing today is still very limited, particularly in the public sector, and it's not a common practice in green public procurement. Our research reveals that it can be viewed as a helpful tool, but it is not a crucial prerequisite for greening public procurement. It is only useful when there actually are post-acquisition costs. And for those products, services, and work groups, it could be made mandatory. However, LCC is a fairly complex accounting technique and requires specific expertise as well as specific data that might not be readily available. Therefore, it would also be pragmatic to focus only on the relevant direct life cycle costs, which resembles the total cost of ownership method that is widely used in the private sector. We also saw that third-party eco-labeling is a good way to ensure high environmental standards of products, services, and works. It can be included in the public tendering as part of technical specifications or award criteria, and it's really an efficient alternative for incorporating this life cycle principles, life cycle thinking into public procurement. Another policy implementation relates to the fact that, and this is what Alma mentioned before, that the higher purchasing price, whether actual or perceived, of these eco-friendly products is by far the biggest obstacle for GPP implementation. But this hurdle cannot be overcome by applying life cycle costing, nor can it be solved solely at the level of the public procurement function. At the end of the day, this points to political will. If there's a clear commitment to reducing the carbon footprint of government activity, government should also be willing to take this higher price premium for the greener options in the short run. In closing, we would like to share one fundamental observation that we made. Public procurement in general and green public procurement specifically is normally seen as a purely legal matter, and it is hardly perceived as part of the PFM process. But what our research has shown is that optimizing the public financial management environment facilitates GPP implementation. Consequently, it should be viewed as a PFM reform. Often, the public procurement function is rather fragmented. This is true for decentralized as well as centralized systems. And central financing agencies such as ministries of finance or treasury play only a minor role, if at all. This not optimal institutional setup influences the political economy because what we see is missing is a clear reform driver. So for legal people, the case is quite clear. Changing the law for GPP is the implementation. But for PFM people, this changing the law is only the beginning of implementation. And PFM people know that reforms to PFM systems should be addressed through a comprehensive change process. And I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. We look forward to your inputs and a lively discussion.
Thanks so much, Alma and Antonia. This is very important findings. I mean, you spoke about the gap between the green public procurement and the regulatory framework. And I like your conclusion that it's not just about the framework, there are other things that comes into it. You talk about the need to close the implementation gap, again, between the PFM enablers and the GPP, like you call it. We're a bank of acronyms. So as you were calling the acronyms, and I was like, okay, this is very close to the bank. You also talked about how this impacts on carbon dioxide emissions. For those who are not very scientific like me, CO2 is carbon dioxide, I believe. So talking about the emission and how this impacts on it, I was really, I'll take you up on the need to centralize the procurement, given the fact that there's a lot of talk about decentralization these days for effective service delivery. And also you spoke about, the life cycle costing. How, I mean, is this important, or how does this impact on it? So let's go to our panelists now. I'd like to get perspectives from our panelists. And I would like to start with Radar, from a country perspective. Radar works with the Public Procurement Authority in Albania, as I introduced her initially. So Radar, I mean, I'll just like you to take your comments from two perspectives. And this is actually what I will request from all the panelists as well. First, what do you see as the key lessons from the implementation of the Green Public Procurement and its efficiency? And two, what would you regard as the critical PFM and institutional aspects that needs to be worked on for the GPP? Over to you, Rada.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and hello to everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. Very happy to be
Rada, sorry to cut you short. Yeah. Just to inform the participants that you can post your questions, your comments, either on the chat or on the Q&A forum. So on any of the two, we have colleagues who are checking this out. So please post your comments, post your questions so that we can address as many as possible. Rada, over to you again. My apologies.
It's okay. Thank you. As I was said, I'm very happy to be part of a panel having a discussion on green procurement, where Albania is having some baby steps, we have to say, but still starting to work toward this, let's say, consideration on public procurement system as whole. We in Albania do use e-procurement system, as was mentioned before, since 2009 now. So we already have experienced some benefit of using e-procurement in a whole process, but still, needed some further effort for environmental and green procurement as such to do other steps toward this let's say, kind of reformatory way of working on public procurement. We started in 2020 for the first time with our national strategy on public procurement and with a new regulatory framework, implementing and introducing for the first time some new concepts on green public procurement, on GPP, providing in our legislation for the first time some provisions on eco-label, some provisions on sustainable development on public procurement, some provisions on life cycle of the process, and some provisions on meat using, so the most effective advantages economically offer in a public procurement procedure, emphasizing the fact that in all of them, if we can use environmental aspects or consideration, then we'll improve the, let's say, the efficiency of the whole system at the very end. And sure, all of these have to be taken into consideration at the very end during the contract implementation, which is very much important, even more important than just having some rules during the competition phase. At the same time, we did work together with the World Bank here in two main phases. So first of that, we did produce the draft document on how to use green consideration on public procurement. We already have prepared a guideline on using GPP and a methodology how to use it in practice, which is very much important, this kind of approach to raise the awareness of the contracting authority and help them how they can use these theoretical concepts so far in their everyday work in public procurement. And we did also a survey just to measure the way of perceivedness of such concepts on both sides, in contracting authority sides and on economic operator sides. And the response on that was less or more on the way that we have, let's say, our expectations. First of all, more than half of them was not aware very much of the GPP concepts and how to use them. And second of all the more half of them was responses that an answer that the using GPP will cost more, will increase prices. And these were, let's say, two of the main considerations that we took back from these questionnaires, meaning that we have to work in two main directions. First, working with both sides, contracting authorities and economic operators, to increase their knowledge on this regard. And second, having into consideration the cost effect of this exercise. So, and here I see the connection with PFM and the let's say the input that this financial aspects of the process has to be into consideration. So, and this is our approach up to now as government, as the public procurement agency in charge of this task. So we have prepared the legal, let's say, provisions on this regard. So we have all the legal framework in place. We have worked with the a guideline on how to use GPP and also methodology in mostly in cases, with concrete cases, how to use it in practice. So it's not theoretically, but full of concrete cases on how to use it. And we have introduced it and planning to introduce it in a curriculum on public procurement, just the topic on green procurement. So for the first time, we'll have a dedicated topic on green procurement in curricula, which will be dedicated to advanced experts or expertise on public procurement for public administration. Sure, now we have to collaborate also together with the Ministry of Finance and having, let's say, their input in this process. They have to be taken into consideration that this will be a costly process, in a meaning that we can't consider now just lowest price as it is in our perceiveness of public procurement. And in this aspect, what I wanted to emphasize on the shoes of someone who is practicing it, or someone who has to tell to the others to practice it, we have to take into consideration the education and training of audit offices as well, because they are very much important in the, let's say, after part of the competition process. They have to be aware of the fact that if we're using green procurement, or if we are going toward this direction, we'll not getting the lowest price now, but we'll get a, let's say cost-effective productive process at the very end after some years of using these products that we have bought now. And just to conclude it, we also are, yeah, so just one last phrase. We have also kind of monitoring how and if the contracting authorities are using it voluntary basis now, and there are some usage of GPP's considerations on voluntary basis, but they are kind of put it in a situation that how they kind of score the methodology of economic operators that will reduce the negative impact, environmental impact. So this is the main way how they use it as a GPP criteria in a public procurement. And let's see, still we are doing baby steps. We are going to leave it as involuntary basis, but increasing the training phase and the awareness phase for all parties, contract authorities, economic operators, auditors. And let's see how far we'll proceed and how fast we'll proceed with this let's say reform we are trying to do in Albania in this perspective. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rada. I won't try to summarize what you said, but I really see the importance of the awareness, you know, the awareness, the knowledge, but also informing people about the impact on the price and cost, because those are some of the drawbacks. Thanks very much. I like the fact that you said it's not even included in the curriculum. That's taking it from even from the school level. That's really good. So Barbara, I know Barbara is connected, and I'd like to know Barbara's perspective. Barbara, are you connected?
Yes, hello. I am connected, but I'm currently based in Nigeria with very unstable internet. I'm not sure if you can hear me well.
I can hear you well, Barbara, and I apologize on behalf of Nigeria because Nigeria is my country. So you don't need to apologize. I'll apologize on your behalf. But Barbara, I know you're working extensively as a procurement specialist in the bank. So what's your perspective? You had the presentation, you had Radar's perspective from a client's perspective, from a country perspective. So what would you think are the key lessons from your engagements with various countries, maybe in Nigeria, to implement the Green Public Procurement and the critical institutions you're working with? If you can keep it to 5 minutes, please.
I think I will be shorter in taking into account my internet interruptions, but actually I fully share and agree with the findings of Alma and Antonia. Actually, in our country engagements where the World Bank is also trying to help governments advance GPP, we also realize that what is actually needed to advance, especially implementation stage, is to have a clear implementation methodology focusing on lots of aspects. I would start with the first one, which is already mentioned by Antonia and Alma, is a high political will and commitment, and a clear GPP strategy that is fully aligned with national policies and strategies. And so without this political commitment and also clear institutional leadership, it will be very difficult to advance on GPP implementation. Next, is very important is enabling legal framework. So many countries already have laws and include environmental criteria in their public procurement laws, but some of them are lacking implementation regulations, some bylaws to give reassurance to procuring entities that they can freely use all the features of the law without being questioned later on by state audit institutions. Next, what is needed is a clear engagement with private sector, and we notice that public procurers are very reluctant in engaging fully with private sector, especially in developing countries. They are afraid of being questioned by various audit bodies. But for advancing GPP, we saw that it is crucial to better understand what the market can offer, what kind of green goods and services, and if there is no actually market for greening, basically start the discussion with them, so then they can prepare in the future, they can change their methodologies, technologies, and maybe in 2-3 years time they will be ready to supply such goods and services to the public sector. Another topic is professionalization. Without professional procurement officers, as well as professional private sector training courses and additional support given by public procurement agencies, giving them learning tools, it will be very difficult to change mindset of current procurers, because very often we are faced with procuring entities, especially at subnational levels, that are used to traditional way of conducting procurement, and it is more about actually change management process and raising awareness. And next one that was mentioned also is implementation tools, giving GPP criteria ready to use sample tender documents, and also monitoring, which is also a key feature to basically for countries to monitor progress in GPP. And we also see that monitoring is the weakest area. basically countries would have to upgrade their e-government procurement systems to include better data and indicators that they will be able to retrieve data on green public procurement and hopefully more advanced data on CO2 reduction emissions. So with that, I will stop and will be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barbara. You know, I like the way you started, and I usually tell people either it's procurement, public financial management, every aspect of governance, political will is core. And you started with that, of course, with the right policies, the right strategies, the right regulations, and engagement with the private sector. The government cannot do this alone. I agree with you totally. And of course, the monitoring. So thanks very much for that. So let me come home. So a very good friend, Svetlana. Svetlana, I'm sure you want to look at this from the perspective of public financial management. Just to mention that Svet has done quite a lot of work on public financial management, on other aspects of governance, and also on areas of sustainability, let me put it like that. So Svet, what's your perspective? Greening public procurement, what are the critical PFM institutional issues, and probably from your work on sustainability, if we can keep it to 5 minutes as well, Svetlana.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Nikki, it's great to join you, Srini, and the rest at this excellent and very timely event. And since I have 5 minutes, I will focus on 2 issues. I'm shifting from the usual 3 to just 2. So first, I will reflect on how the green procurement reforms are actually interconnected with the broader sustainable and climate finance reforms. And second, I would reflect on how evolution of the global standard setting process, and in particular, introduction of the global sustainability reporting standards may and likely will have significant impact on the green procurement reforms. So on the first point, I think that the study which has been presented to us and which by itself is incredibly interesting and rich in content made a very important conclusion that it would be very difficult to shift the needle if we would just focus on the green public procurement in isolation from the broader set of the public financial management reforms. The climate change agenda is vast. It has many dimensions, and climate finance is one of the particularly important dimensions which cuts across everything that we are trying to do. And as we look at climate finance, we look in parallel at the ways to unlock the private financial flows and public financial flows towards the projects and activities that would help us to move forward climate change agenda. So when we speak about public financial flows, of course, it is hard to overestimate importance of the broad set of reforms cutting across the entirety of the PFM cycle, including procurement, but starting actually with budgeting, planning, execution. Now, as other speakers have mentioned, where it all really starts is with the government designing and implementing a set of reforms, policy levers, and incentives which will direct the rest of the agencies and all other parts of the government towards activities that would help us to achieve the preset set of objectives focused on advancing climate change agenda. As many of you probably have heard, we now see globally the uptake of the taxonomies which prioritize activities, which prioritize and also incentivize and rewards in some ways activities which are focused on certain objectives, starting with climate. In many cases, these taxonomies go broader. They cover the broader range of sustainability-linked projects and activities, but climate is your first entry point. So obviously, once you have this kind of taxonomy, to implement it, you need to have the public procurement processes, which would enable you to shift from policy to implementation. And this is where my second point comes, because once again, as your other speakers have mentioned, one of the key challenges is cost and capacity to identify the right types of projects, activities, goods. If you are part of the government's public procurement function and you are given the mandate to follow certain policies and to make sure that you prioritize purchase of goods or services which meet certain requirements, taxonomy, categories, etc., how exactly are you supposed to go out there and identify these kind of activities and projects? And this is where the evolution of the global standard setting process, and in particular, introduction by many jurisdictions of sustainability reporting standards, which would complement the existing financial information and which we expect to start really hitting the markets and jurisdictions in the next 2 years. We already have the draft standards which are going to be finalized. Then jurisdictions will decide how they should be applied. And in about 2 years, we will start getting this huge wave of new information when companies would be disclosing information about how they perform in the sustainability area. And we think that this is going to make a huge difference in many different ways. And one, of course, is positive impact on enabling green public procurement. Whereas if you are part of the government public procurement function, you now would be able to look at the company not only from the perspective of its financial performance, but from the perspective of how well is it doing in certain sustainability areas, starting from climate. So we think that A, this will give you information, so you would know where to go. B, it will cut your cost, because all this information will be publicly available. It will be audited. That's a very important requirement, that all this new information will have to be independently audited. And there is a big focus on digitalization so that it would be easily accessible to various stakeholders and decision makers. So Nikki, I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I will be happy to respond.
Thanks so much, Svet. Very important perspectives there. Thanks so much. So at this point, I would like to invite two colleagues. You know, within the in the GGP, within the PEFA Secretariat, we had some colleagues who have been overseeing a number of this research work. Actually, this is one of the many research work we've been doing in the PEFA Secretariat. A new core part of the work we do to, you know, look at aspects of global work that impacts on governance. And this work has been led by Tia Rapana and Richard Sutherland. So I'd like to call on Tia, Richard, for their perspectives from the great work you've been doing, but also from what you've heard from the presenters as well as our discussants. If you can each keep it to about 3 minutes each. Thank you. Who is going first? Anyone?
Thanks, Nikki. Thank you so much. I'll start and then I'll pass on to Richard. But thank you, everybody. This has been really, really fascinating discussion. From PEFA perspective, let me make just a couple of quick points drawing on to what the presenters, but your other discussants already made. When we look at the implementation of GPP, but particularly looking at the perspective of the systems, what we really would like to emphasize is ensuring the transparency and accountability of green public procurement. And let me elaborate a little bit. There's two reasons why I say that. One of them is that we know that transparency and accountability over procurement, particularly during COVID, has been a big issue. And we are particularly looking at the climate finance, significant resource needs that are coming, but also some of the urgency relating to that, particularly when disasters happen. There are some significant risks around can we maintain the transparency and the integrity of that spending? We also know, and other speakers have related to that, that monitoring of green public procurement is particularly weak right now. So we would really want to stress the need for proper oversight of green public procurement. We discussed e-procurement, which is fantastic and it's a good start, but it's not alone enough. In the PEFA climate framework, 2 of the 4 dimensions are looking at proper reporting and monitoring of green public procurement, and that's really, really important, including that we have very clear procedures for emergency green public finance and procurement, and how does that work in those situations. And similarly, as Rada said, we really want to stress the importance of developing the capacity of not only internal audit, but also external auditors and parliaments to really understand and monitor the aspects of green public procurement that can be sometimes quite technical and complex. I would want to also mention in the chat, we have a couple of very good discussion points around this issue, whether, for example, we could use open contracting standards to monitor green public procurement, which is a fantastic question. Similarly, whether blockchain technology could be used for that, which is also a very good question. The second point, why really transparency and accountability is important, is the issue of greenwashing, the concern that whether actually the green finance that goes through our system, including procurement, is really green, and what impact does it make? A lot of the presenters have already said about the fact that we need a really clear reform trying for this, very clear strategy for clean public procurement. Very much completely agree with that. This is not a PFM issue, but the reality is that procurement systems can only respond if there's that very clear defined strategy for that, but also very clear standards of what clean public procurement mean. From PEFA perspective, when PEFA climate module has been used in countries, we face a lot the issue that clean finance and what does climate friendly finance mean is not being defined. And when it's not being defined based on very clear strategy, there's not much what PFM systems or procurement systems can do, and we cannot really track whether that spending is being effective. So a call is really more discussion, and as Svetlana was saying, global standards of what this clean public procurement means, and perhaps this is something where we need to do more research. But also from PEFA side, we are now planning a PEFA knowledge hub, so we also say that we can collect more examples of what really effective clean public procurement means in different contexts, and we can try to contribute to this discussion as well. Over to Richard to make a final point from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia, and thank you, colleagues, for a fascinating discussion on green procurement. Let me join Tia in congratulating the entire team, the researchers, for this excellent paper, and also the discussants for adding very diverse and interesting perspectives of the value of investing in green procurement reforms. Perhaps the only major point I would add or like to emphasize, especially from the PEFA perspective, is more around the importance of maintaining sight of core PFM capacity, even as we explore how to make procurement greener. One straightforward yet, I think, critical conclusion of the paper is that there are certain basic features, again, of a sound PFM system that are necessary to facilitate the adoption of green procurement reforms, emphasizing that a whole of government approach is needed. So against this backdrop, it's important to recognize that procurement itself is the major problems that remains in procurement itself that many countries still struggle with, pointing to the significant need to improve basic procurement policies, systems, and practices. To give you just one quick sense of this, of the magnitude of this challenge, the 2022 version of the Global Report on PFM highlights that there's significant prevalent use of non-competitive procurement standards or procurement methods. And as we know, this may have implications for the quality and efficiency of expenditure. In fact, the report shows that more than half, 63% of the countries that we surveyed, awarded contracts, single source contracts, large contracts, that is, right? So, so this has implications for what we mean by green and who are the bidders and how we go about engaging with the private sector to deliver these green products. The second thing is more on the use of e-procurement system. Again, this was emphasized in the paper that these systems can facilitate greening of public procurement functions. But yet, 56% or so of the countries that we surveyed, they barely had the capacity, basic capacity to monitor procurement. And this is like maintaining comprehensive databases or records management, these basic things. So if they can't overcome, many countries can't overcome these basic limitations, then making them green is even more difficult. So all that to say, green procurement is really valuable, but countries should, as the paper emphasized, approach it in a whole of government approach, looking at strengthening core systems, even as they go about trying to infuse or mainstream green procurement criteria in the PFM system. Let me stop there and just point that the PEFA framework, the climate framework also provides, as Tia said, looking at the framework side, but as the researchers point out, the implementation gap often occurs at the operational level, monitoring level, and the reporting level. So 3 indicators are dedicated solely to these 3 levels so that we can ensure a more credible approach to green procurement. Let me stop there and hand over back to Nike. Thank you.
Thanks, Tia, and Richard, thanks for pointing that out. I just want to tell participants that the colleagues of the PEFA Secretariat has posted some things on the chat. First is the research paper. I see some people asking for a copy of the research paper. The research paper has been posted. We're not going to post the presentation, but the research paper has been posted, and you can probably use it as reference for whatever work you want to do. Secondly, as you may know, the PEFA Secretariat developed what we call the Climate Supplementary Framework. So for colleagues in countries who probably want to do an assessment of how far you've gone on your climate compliance vis-a-vis your public financial management, there's a supplementary framework that you can use for that. And of course, colleagues in the PEFA Secretariat can advise on how to go on that. The framework, again, has been posted on the chat so that you can browse through it and see how you can use this for your country. So again, thanks to the presenters, to my discussants, and to colleagues from the PEFA Secretariat. So at this point, we'll go to the questions and answers. And I know there are some very good questions that has been posted. So presenters, discussants, everybody, if you cannot come on the screen, you are now on the hot seat. I'm joking. Okay, so first, I'd like to go to Radar. Radar. Of course, you know, the country perspective is always very important in many of those things that we talked about. So 2 questions I would like you to handle. The first one, what are the incentives that is needed for a greener, you know, to go this GGP route? What I mean, you spoke about a number of things, a number of challenges, awareness, knowledge, cost. So what are the incentives that will be needed probably to make the public institutions and even the private institutions to go greener in their products and services? I have a second one, but answer that and then I'll go to the next.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nika. As I see, following the discussions as well, what I see is very much important, starting from the willingness of government to push this process forward. First, it will be very much important for government to see a real impact on this exercise and on this, let's say, process. So if someone will be able to tell them to the government that this using green criteria in public procurement in general will cost you such less in long term or in 5 years long now, it will be very much helpful and let's say giving some incentives to government to push the process forward. First of all. The second, it will be very much important more in a perspective of a contracting authority or public administration, it will be very much important in the perspective of economic operators, because we have to consider in public procurement also this competition principle, as we said in our discussions. And it will be very much important to put somehow, not to put them in different stages on what they are doing. If we are requiring some green criteria on their contract implementation, we have to kind of incentive them to be part of this exercise. Otherwise, they will not join us and will end up with single source competition procedures or no competition at all. So we have to incentive somehow. A government has, in my perspective and experience on public procurement agency as well, they have to, the governments have to incentive the economic operators, maybe with subsidizing some of their innovation technologies or somehow in their everyday activities. And if they will join this let's say initiative of the government, will be even kind of scored or subsidized in money. Still it's about money, the issue that will incentive them to participate. Otherwise we can do on our side, but will not have their collaboration in the other side.
Great one, Raida. Thank you. I'll come back to you. Let me go to Alma and Antonia for now. So Alma, Antonia, is it the same incentive for all countries? Does it cut across, or do we have to look at specific country context to design or to think about incentives for specific countries? And I'm looking at it from the perspective of low-income countries, high-income countries, middle-income countries. Do we have to think about specific incentives for specific countries? Alma, Antonia, any one of you?
So yes, I think different incentives are definitely needed in different contexts. I mean, we have to look at a country very specifically and identify, what exactly can be or at what level of, let's say, GPP implementation a country is, and where then we have to, add to advance it. But here I think it's where really also the concept of the e-procurement comes in. So e-procurement, for example, especially if we are thinking of less developed countries, can make many processes more efficient, but also make them cheaper, and also support, for example, local firms in advancing in GPP. So I think, to answer your question, yes, we cannot give one size fits all solution, but what we have discussed in the context of our paper, the enablers that we have discussed and the solutions, especially with regards to e-procurement system, if we think in context of less developed countries, would make a lot of sense.
Thank you very
Maybe
much.
Antonia,
somebody just posted the biggest incentive, like Galia said the biggest incentive is to preserve Earth resources for future generations. We totally agree with that. In addition, we're trying to see how to be very practical, how to be intentional in doing this. That's very good contribution. Thanks, Galina. I'll still like to stay with you, Antonia and Alma. So one of the things that came out of your study is the fact that this discussion about centralization. You said it would be good to centralize the GPP. However, from everything we've been seeing in the PFM world, in the governance world, and understanding the fact that governance is all about effective service delivery, and service delivery is at a decentralized level. So I'm just wondering, how does this align, having focus for decentralization for service delivery at decentralized level, but we're saying to do this work of climate effectively, it has to be centralized. How do we align the two? Sorry, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
Well, thank you for this question, Alma. I will answer this if this is okay for you. So So no, actually, if you look at the primary objectives of public procurement, which is the timely and economical delivery of purchase of products, it's like either form of organization has its benefits. Like if you have a highly decentralized system, you can be close to the markets, you know, the suppliers and so forth, and you're closer to the needs. Whereas there are a few benefits with regard to more centralized systems, such as, and that we spoke about today, is, for example, a higher degree of professionalization, and it's just all in all a bit more effective than in terms of also the specific know-how that is needed. So we would not conclude that for the sake of greening, it's necessary to really envisage a full centralization. There are, what we saw, however, is that it's necessary, it requires a lot of cooperation to implement green public procurement. And if there are many stakeholders involved, this becomes more difficult to manage. This is where centralized systems just have a clear advantage. But we hope that with a few options or a menu of options that we provided, we also give, you know, a few ideas on how procuring agencies can cooperate in a decentralized environment. And I hope this answers your question.
It sure does, Antonia. It sure
maybe
does.
add one thing to what Antonia said. The idea is not, you know, to have a fully centralized procurement system. This is not what we mean or what we discuss in a paper. But what we have seen in our case study countries is that the degree of centralization that we're talking about is, for example, local buyer groups like we see in the Netherlands. So that groups, you know, they come together and they reap the benefits of knowledge that they share with each other. But it's not the idea to have a fully centralized procurement system.
Thank you very much, and I totally agree with you. So, Barbara, I don't know if this Nigerian network is still working with you. Don't worry, I'm going to talk to the Nigerian government. We need to get this right because we need important.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. We need important contribution. Oh, wow, we can even see you now. That's really good. You see, I spoke to them. I talked to somebody. That's why this is working. Don't mind me. So just tell me, you know, there's a very good question that came in, and I'd like to know your perspective if you have any. So, you know, the case studies of using blockchain technology to support, you know, governance, oversight. How does this work in public procurement? Particularly, I mean, in the kind of country you're working with and so many other countries where there are issues around corruption, around collusion. So what's your perspective on blockchain or any artificial intelligence to support this work?
Thank you. I got part of your question, but actually in the bank we are closely engaged in facilitating and advancing and promoting these advanced technologies for the use of better, more efficient public procurement, and we see that many countries are advancing actually, and obviously, you know, with better, more efficient e-GP system, we can get better and more reliable data. I am not an expert in blockchain, but what we see in green public procurement so far in the client countries we have engaged is that their data analysis is very limited. They basically only monitor number in terms of number of contracts and value of tenders and contracts that include environmental criteria mostly, which is a very limited indicator. And actually this work, even globally, is not yet fully advanced. And we are having, even internally in the bank, problems of, you know, figuring out what should be the best practice green public procurement monitoring framework and how to do it in an efficient and effective manner. So it is still a work in progress for many countries. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Barbara. So, Svet, I want your perspective. And again, like I mentioned, Svetlana, okay, like I mentioned, I know you've been doing a lot of work on standards with standard setters. And from all the presentations we had about, regulations, framework, are there any standards that are currently related to, this climate issue? And secondly, would you have any thoughts on possible funding for countries? I mean, maybe from a World Bank perspective or donor perspective, funding for countries to be able to do these green public procurement. Any perspective from you?
So when it comes to the reporting standards linked to climate, we actually see three main initiatives now unfolding in parallel, which will have significant impact on the global landscape and which probably are jointly going to dominate the global landscape. First, International Sustainability Standards Board has drafted two of their first standards, the general framework and the climate-related financial disclosure, and these standards are expected to be finalized in the coming months. So these are the so-called, the ISSB standards are often referred to as the global standards and baseline standards, because they primarily ask corporations to disclose information relevant for their investors. So they don't go as far as to start assessing impact of the entity on the broader economy. In parallel, we had a very important development in the European Union, where they have passed the something called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So that's already the regulation which demands certain types of companies, and there are about 50,000 companies which are covered by the scope of the CSRD to report on their sustainability related issues. Europe will have its own set of standards which are consistent with the global standards which are developed by EFRAG. So it's the European Sustainability Standard Setting Body. However, they would have the broader scope of disclosure. So European standards would ask companies, for example, to also disclose impact their activities would have on the broader society. And this is actually quite important. And finally, the US Security Exchange Commission is finalizing the rule, which is going to demand certain companies to disclose their climate-related financial risks. And that, of course, also would have a big importance once finalized, because US capital markets are very important for the broader global economy. So what it means is that we are looking at the process where sustainability reporting is going to be mainstreamed in the way global capital markets function. There are three different streams which are taking place. Good news is that they are all trying to be as aligned as possible. We know that some of them are more demanding than the others. So European standards will be more demanding. Once again, from the perspective of the public procurement, all this is super relevant, because this is going to be the basis of information that you are going to be looking at while you are assessing which company to choose, which company would fall under the scope of your green procurement requirements, in whichever way that is determined. Also, what is very important is that International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board now has started the process where they would design the framework for sustainability reporting for governments, for sovereigns. So it means that the entire sort of universe of financial flows is going to be covered from the perspective of this reporting. To your last point, and I will be very brief, Nike, is that indeed to implement these new standards, it is going to be quite an undertaking. Let's not underestimate the significance of this reform. It's probably the biggest capital markets reform that me and you have seen in our professional lifetime. We have had introduction of the global financial reporting standards. However, that standards were building on the existing standards. Here we have the entirely conceptually new type of reporting, which did not exist before, and which would require a very distinct set of expertise to prepare. So for what it means for countries is that they need to decide how they are going to adopt or adapt these standards, what regulations they are going to pass, and how are they going to prepare their economy for the implementation of these standards in terms of technical assistance, etc. And we, as the World Bank, are now, of course, looking at this because our concern is to make sure, positive concern is to make sure that introduction of these new requirements and standards, which ultimately aim to shift capital flows towards climate-friendly activities, does not have unintended consequences, so that it doesn't make it more difficult for countries to access markets. So that's a bit of a longer answer, but it's a big issue you touched on. Thank you.
Thanks, and that's very important. Thanks. We don't mind the length. The content was really good. Thank you. And for the financing colleagues, development partners are working with various countries to support them in this regard. And I mean, this is now very important. Many of you might have heard about the COP, which happens every year, which is an opportunity to discuss climate in various countries and at a very high level. Presidents attend and, you know, really discuss how this can be moved forward. I want to mention that we also have the honor of having JP Group of the MAP Secretariat. MAP Secretariat is actually that group that works on the methodology for assessing procurement systems. And JP has also reminded me that, you know, they've also worked on, you know, supporting the procurement systems in increasing GPP in what they do. It's also posted their link on the Q&A forum. I guess we'll put that on the chat too. So if you want to get more information on what the MAP Secretariat is doing in this respect, it will be very nice if you can go to the link and check it out. So let me just, I know we're making a very efficient use of our time. Let me quickly go back to Radar. So Radar, Albania is like up there, really doing very good work on this GPP. But I mean, one of the comments is that Albania produces large parts of its energy through renewables. So does it give it an upper hand in this work vis-a-vis other countries in the region or even other countries in the world?
Yeah, thank you. We are trying hard, meaning that we are a small country in this transition way to improve ourselves and improve the procurement system in general. And yeah, we do hope that all the situation in here and this renovation and energy as well will help us with this exercise as a whole. And I haven't time to mention that we are working towards also the efficiency, energy efficiency in parallel with green procurement, green criteria as such. So we are working into both tracks which will help each other, and if they both will be used in public procurement system, they will help the entire process as well. But still, what I want to emphasize at the very end is that this is an exercise that shouldn't be forced one. We have to have our time, so both actors and stakeholders included in it has to have their own time to let's say get used with the concepts, get used with the idea, because it's very challenging approach that and initiative. So we shouldn't give up on this, but our expectation will not be that tomorrow everyone will use green criteria and after tomorrow we'll have all the good results on using it. We have to keep working with it and do our part of the job with all stakeholders to push forward the process, but still need the time. We have to get the necessary time on doing it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Radar. So, colleagues, I just want Richard and probably Tia, very briefly, probably in 2 minutes, to give a quick brief on the PEFA Climate Supplementary Framework, very briefly, so that the about 115 or more participants that we have today can know what they can use to do a quick assessment for their countries or for whichever place. Very briefly, before I pass it on to Srini. Richard, Antia.
Thank you, Nike. Maybe I could just touch on the general design of the framework, and then Tia could give more specifics on the indicators regarding procurement. So generally, the PEFA framework for climate change assessment was launched in July 2020, and it basically aims to support the mainstreaming of climate change in PFM systems. It includes 14 broad indicators that are structured around the PFM cycle, replicating largely the design of the core PEFA framework. And these indicators touch on different things, starting from the planning side of the budget all the way through execution. Importantly, what distinguishes this framework from others is that it accounts for the policy side of procurement. Recognizing that we don't necessarily assess policies, but the policies provide the context within which we assess the PFM system. So, for example, if you're targeting a particular set of reforms, then we look at the administrative instruments, the PFM administrative instruments that are in place that will enable achievement of those reforms. Let me hand over to Tia to comment on Indicator 8, which focuses on procurement.
Thank you, Richard. Maybe just quickly add, yes, so since we're talking about green public procurement today, we have one specific indicator that looks at that aspect, particularly looking at how the green public procurement systems work. How are those policy objectives, what we talked about, how has that been integrated in the procurement system? And particularly, as we mentioned, how is green public procurement defined? How is the scope defined? And then how is it reported and monitored on throughout the system? But Sylvia has very kindly put the link to the climate framework on the chat. So please have a look at that, and please let us know if you have any questions, if you're interested in applying that. Final note to say that it's still in pilot. So a lot of you have made such excellent comments on the research paper today. If you have also comments and feedback on how the framework works and on the pilot, please let us know, because we're still finalizing that and making sure that it works in these different kinds of contexts that we talked about today. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So at this point, I'm signing off. I'll pass it over to Srini, head of the PEFA Secretariat, who is going to give a brief summary, the votes of thanks, and then close the event. Srini,
Thank you very much, Nike, and such a fantastic webinar. I thoroughly enjoyed listening through, and we are so glad that we picked this theme, one for the research competition. The research team did tremendous job, and this particular event, which came out so well. I wouldn't take a risk of actually trying to summarize this rich conversation. It's very clear that public procurement is so fundamental to public financial management systems and cannot be seen separate. And on the top of it, when we add a greening public procurement layer for climate responsiveness, that is the thing which is going to influence the times that we go forward. And we in the PEFA Secretariat would be committed to continue this conversation and develop mechanism for governments to implement green public procurement, climate responsive public financial management systems globally. Let me quickly make use of 1 minute of time from advertisement and promotion purposes. So colleagues, many of you know that PEFA is a framework which assessments are done at country level. Now the trend that we see is what we are calling PEFA++, a PEFA assessment at national or subnational, and adding a climate or a gender module to that. That's what is PEFA++. Any of you interested in getting in touch and implementing in your own countries, either a PEFA assessment,
individually. It can be a climate assessment individually or a combination PEFA++. Please get in touch with us, write to us through services@pefa.org, or just reach out through the social media channels. We are very responsive there if you just send a message there as well. Then let me also give you a heads up of what's going to come very soon. We are planning several other events and hope you will all be able to join us to those events in the times to come. Two quick things which will come up are the global trends in Africa in PFM systems. This event is being recently delivered in French language. We will be doing it in English very soon, and a similar event for Asia would also be organized soon. We also have the global stocktake of public financial management systems. I see this whole universe of PFM systems these days emerge like a multiverse world, where there are different frameworks, tools, and deep dive tools that we need to navigate through to bring together the big messages as to how countries can use the multiple public financial management tools available. That's what we are making through this global report on tools for public financial management systems, which will be launched very soon, listing out all the tools and indicating the interactions between all of them. And finally, this research competition has been phenomenal in informing public PFM systems globally, and also for us in the PEFA Secretariat. Right now, we have an ongoing PEFA research competition, which is focusing on transparency and accountability in PFM systems during COVID-19 era. And that's something which we hope in the second half of this calendar year, we would be presenting. With that, let me thank all the speakers for the fantastic interventions, the presenters for excellent presentations, and to Nike for managing the show so well in moderating. And thanks to the chair for opening the session. Looking forward to seeing all of you in other events and connecting with you through other modes. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.